as we dig in. Good evening, everyone. My name is Colleen Fitzpatrick, and I'm the Executive Director at the Rotary Center for the Arts. So thank you very much for joining us for tonight's Art Talks. It's part of our RCA at Home program that we launched in the spring. They're monthly talks and an opportunity for artists and art leaders to connect here with our arts community and those that are curious here in Kelowna. And tonight we have Responding to the Moment, or at least trying, with Artistic Director James Long. So thank you very much for joining us. Before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Silks Okanagan people on these beautiful lands that we are very fortunate to live, work, and play on. Our evening's guest host is Neil Cadger. He's Associate Professor of Creative Studies at UBCO. And some of his research involves theater, puppetry, theatrical masks, live installations, dance and theater, and all things theater here in Kelowna. And thank you very much for Neil for introducing James to our Art Talks tonight. So with that said, I would like to turn the table over to Neil.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. That's the way we pass the ball here, don't we? Go, thank you, Colleen, over to you.
Theatrical way.
So thanks, Colleen. Yeah, I've seen James Long's work. I have been aware of his work and seen some of it since somewhere back in 2005. I don't remember exactly, but the shows that I mean, he's, just so I can say, he's the artistic director of Theater Replacement. So he's going to tell you a little bit more about himself. We can get into, where did you study and all of that if people want to later on. But he is currently artistic co-director of Theater Replacement. And I've known him for many years. The first thing I saw was Bio Boxes I think it was in Calgary, where the performers, it was one-on-one. So the audience members would come in, one into this little curtain. You opened the curtain and you came in, and there was a performance. A person came up with their head right in front of you, but it was in a tiny sort of stage. And it was an extraordinary performance of scale. And Clark and I in Connecticut, I remember seeing James doing that in Vancouver, which was based on found material in an alley, material of I think written material and photographs from a family there. So the performance was based on that. And Winners and Losers, we actually brought to Kelowna many years ago, a piece based on games. I'm in some way, James will maybe talk about that in a bit. What that exactly was, what it was based on. And then I've seen only a video version of recent work, footnote number 12. So all of these works are source various different resources or directions, collaborations. They're multidisciplinary, and they are devising. They're devising. And so I'd like to pass it to you, James, to tell us about where you come from, and then we can talk about devising and the various components of that later on.
Sure.
Over to you, James.
Thanks, thanks Neil. Thanks Colleen. Thanks Rotary Center for allowing me to do this. It's a lonely time out here, so it's good to talk to people that aren't my children or my immediate colleagues. Yeah, I never find these things very easy, these first kind of 5 minutes of self-intro and self-aggrandizing, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to say all the wonderful things about yourself. So instead, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to read something that a colleague named Vanessa Kwan, who's a visual arts curator here in Vancouver, she recently wrote for Michael and I for a German magazine that's doing looking at Canadian theater companies. So it's a profile of Theater Replacement and Michael and I, and the Theater Replacement, as Neil mentioned is a company that I run with Michael, and we've run it for about the last 20 years. So this, it's the first time this has been said out loud. It doesn't get published until August, I don't think, but I haven't even told Vanessa. I'm just totally cheating, but it made a lot of sense to me to read it because it points out a couple of really important things, I think, inside my work. And that is, one is that I really commit to paying attention to the world around me as much as possible. I don't work in a vacuum. And the other thing is always working in collaboration with other people, especially people who push me in ways that I would never push myself. So I'll read this little thing. It's about 500 words, I think, and then we'll just look at a quick trailer of footnote number 12, the most recent thing I've made, except for a big old East Van Panto movie, but that's because we had to make an East Van Panto movie because of COVID. But here it goes. So it's called Pathologically Responsive Theater Replacement by Vanessa Kwan. Quotation marks. We are two artists who stand here together today because over 20 years ago, we committed ourselves to making performances that replaced the theater that we were largely seeing around us at the time. Quotation marks closed. So began James Long and Michael Yamamoto's 2019 acceptance for the Siminovich Prize, the largest and most prestigious theater award in Canada. As co-artistic directors of Theater Replacement, it's tempting to write a brief history of their work together around this narrative of achievement, how scrappy collaborators overcome differences to make very, very good work. But I'd rather talk about their approach to spaces of non-resolution, strife, and unruliness alongside this upward trajectory. Their work has always asked and offered this question: what comes of honoring a relationship always in process? Theater Replacement has ranged widely from two-person shows, Winners and Losers, that Neil mentioned, and We Tube, to community-engaged devised pieces, town criers and choirs, to training programs, New Aesthetics, industry showcases for emerging artists, Push Off and Collider, and annual all-ages spectaculars, our big East Van Panto, like in a panto, like Boo Hiss Panto. Theater Replacement has resisted any one approach to culture making. The company has self-reflexively adapted the container of theater to allow for new voices and perspectives to pass through. That recognition of difference, quotations again, we're two very different artists, one female identifying, one male identifying, one Japanese Canadian, one waspy hybrid Canadian, that's me, feeds a wider interruption of assumptions around cultural identity, generational boundaries, class, gender, language, and in many ways, the nature of what it is constituted as a presentation practice itself. And it is not easy, smooth work. Consider Mine, Michael Yamamoto's piece created in collaboration with their then 12-year-old son, Hokuto. The work explores complexities of mother-son relationships woven into a parallel and speculative world building via Minecraft. They played the show as they designed the thing live with this video game. Gathering voices together, it is performed by actors across generations and does not conclude or offer answers so much as aggregate meaning around it. Its core relationship, mother to son, refuses to settle comfortably. Mine evolves, tween-like, with every iteration. Enter from another door footnote number 12, the result of a collaboration between Long and Bergen-based Andrea Spriafico, and their engagement with a New York Times article from 2006. Positing that year is the last when cis hetero whiteness was allowed to stand in as the definitive voice of cultural objectivity. The performance sees the central character, a white-faced, middle-aged, sad sack, through a monologue that flutters around an evaluation of culture, language, and self. All the discomfort of creative reckoning is here. And Footnote's real achievement is in keeping the immediacy of conflict alive and in the room. And so do we as the audience, in all our capacity for evolution and failure and complexity, get to share that room. There's a lesson in that. That's what Vanessa wrote. And now I think we should watch that trailer. It's about a 2-minute trailer of this footnote number 12 piece, which is the last thing I've made. And I think Colleen has the power for that. Or Greta does. There it is.
Yeah.
What
Oh, we don't see
we're
it.
about to do What we're about to do
There we go.
is going to be funny. But please don't laugh. Okay? Because even though it's funny, it's not funny in a laughy sort of way, but more in a mystical way. It's funny in a mystical way. What we're about to do is going to be sophisticated. Please don't be excited or intimidated, okay? Because even though it is sophisticated, it's not sophisticated in a French sort of way, but more in a mystical way. It's sophisticated in a mystical way. What we're about to think about or consider is it's an essay or it's an article. Really, it's about life or mortality. Or actually, no, it's about Roger Federer. Okay, but please don't expect any highlights. Because even though it is about Roger, it's not about Roger in a sporty sort of way, but more in a mystical way. It's about Roger in a mystical way.
If you could please pull out your books, just share amongst yourselves. Turn to page 8. 8.
So there you go. That's me.
Well, thank you. Thank you, James. Thank you. Really, really intriguing material. Just to jump right in at the end of that what we just saw. Can you talk a little bit about the mask that you wear, the distortion of the voice, and why you do that?
There's so many great answers to this, and probably some bad ones too. So I'm just going to try. The main reason, I think the definitive reason why we do those things is because we take 3 years to make a show. So every couple months you have a great idea, and some of them stick and some of them don't. The voices came out of a process when we were in Norway, when we were working on that. When we knew we were engaging in a speech act. It's an essay by a guy named David Foster Wallace. David Foster Wallace was a really, really important writer in the sort of 90s and 2000s. He ended up killing himself in 2008. And he was a really, really important American writer. And he wrote these beautiful essays, and he wrote essays about all sorts of different things. But he wrote these, they're made to be spoken when you read these essays, because they're really convoluted, really complicated text. So we knew we were dealing with a speech act, and at some point in the Bergen workshop in 2000, whatever it was, 17, we decided it needs some kind of technical mediation. We needed to mediate that voice a little bit, just to recognize his passing from many years ago, and also the current moment that everything is mediated. So we started playing with messing with my voice with an artist named Nancy Tam, who works in Vancouver. And we ended up finding 4 voices, really. We found Kermit, who's the excited. We ended up playing with Muppet voices just because it was fun. Kermit, who was the very excited tennis fan, because he was talking about Roger Federer. We found Sam the Eagle, which was this voice of reason, this big, deep voice of reason that would actually read the passages from the book. And then we had this third character that we named Hillary, after Hillary Clinton, just a hyper liberal Democrat type that was always kind of just considering every possible angle and everything. We started playing with those voices and found that not only did it make the piece more watchable, because you just paid attention, it's just a dramatic device, it also allowed me a mask. And it's a performance mask, and it's a liberating mask. As soon as you hear your own voice coming out, completely different. It just opens you up to so many possibilities of performance, and actually fed the rehearsal process throughout. And the same thing with the facial mask, if I can jump on the face mask, that came out of, there's a woman named Rosemary, oh gosh, I can't remember her name now. She's an academic who studies disability and ability. And she came up with a term called the normate. And the normate is basically me. It's someone who exhibits absolutely zero signs of marginalization. Because I do. I am as normal and as privileged as you want it to be. Not economically privileged, I chose the artist life, but I walk down the street and there's no question that I got everything else covered quite comfortably. The normate is hyper white and it's great big blue eyes. It's kind of, in this case, a very frightened normate because the moment has changed in the world, where the normate is actually a little bit more aware of his position in the world. And so that mask, again, that was the mask that we put on for him.
Yeah, really, that's lovely. That transformation of the voice, the transformation of the visual, that gives you a sense of freedom as a performer. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is there a sense of disguise as well in that? Is the freedom in the sense that you can be we don't know who you are?
It's a style of Buffon. You know, I call it Buffon, but I know it's not the classic Buffon at all, because he's not a naughty Buffon. He's not a mean Buffon, but he is challenging audiences' perceptions. It's the Karen Hines Buffon, if you know Karen and Poxy, which is more the innocent Buffon, who reflects the audience back to them, because the majority of my audience is normate like me. And those who aren't normate like me can appreciate the normate position. So I'm reflecting back this hesitancy, this fear of walking through the world right now and saying things that I'm not completely comfortable saying anymore because of the changing social context. So it is me, but it allows me to play a heightened version of myself that I would never do. It's the same with Winners and Losers. Again, a heightened version of myself. There was no mask in that performance, but through repetition, we built up a bit of a mask in a character.
And talking about Winners and Losers, that began. Was that the source of that show? Was that a game? Did you make up a game, or how did that? I can't remember now how that worked.
Yeah, the initial meeting, Marcus Youssef, a guy who runs New World Theater, or ran New World Theater, he's not anymore. We were driving up to the Caravan Farm Theater talking about competition. Actually, a friend of ours, a lighting designer in town, who, as far as we could tell, had everything going on. He had a beautiful family. He seemed to have a really good job. And he sent out this email, which was a pyramid scheme. And it was this thing of join this self-help thing and give me $100 and blah, blah, blah. I'll send you a book. And we were so dumbfounded by it, thinking, why is he doing this? And we started talking about that moment when you hit around 40 and men in particular, and I'm sure women too, but I only know my own experience. And you start gauging other men around you and you start going, is he doing better than me? Is he better? So where's my gap? And we started talking about that idea, and we got ourselves into a studio and we tried to write a play about two Russian novelists trying to write the best Russian novel, because Marcus is a playwright and I wanted to learn about playwriting. And we got bored of that quite quickly. And then we started playing this game where we said, okay, let's put on Russian accents. Again, mask. It's another kind of mask. It's a vocal mask. And write down topics on the wall, whether it's who's the better cook, who's the better parent, or topics, Marilyn Monroe, microwave ovens, Zapatistas, and compete to see who can win the argument. And that's where that game came from. That show came from. It turned into a game.
That's interesting that you start with a game to create a theater performance. And I guess the idea of theater replacement is this is what you're proposing as a replacement for the other processes that make theater productions. But what is it that you want to replace in that way?
Yeah, it's a good question. We made the title up in 2003 when we were just young punks, precocious
Great
little
name.
punks.
I love it. It
has a good ring.
Contentious.
It is contentious, and sometimes it can sound almost pretentious too when we look at it. We're not replacing anything. We know there's place for everybody in the world. Back then we were a little more fisticuffs. We just wanted to create something like Michael and I watched the theater that was happening around us, and we appreciated a lot of it, but we were also recognized that it wasn't speaking to us. The formal proposals that were being made in the shows just weren't that exciting. We wanted to see something just a little bit more adventurous. And also in terms of Maiko and I's relationship, who were not married, but we worked together. Maiko's Japanese Canadian. We never saw any Japanese people on stage. We never saw any Asian people back then on stage, or they were really tokenized. And we certainly never saw mixed race performances, so intercultural performances, except for the stuff that we were making. So we wanted to continue that and replace a lot of the stuff we were seeing with what our city streets look like, because that's what we were seeing as we walked down the road. So why weren't we seeing that on stages? So that's one of the big things we were replacing. And then the other thing we're replacing was just more advanced narrative constructs. Like, how do you tell different kinds of stories? How do you create accumulation as opposed to A plus B equals C narrative? And that's what we've been playing with.
So was that also part of your education? Were you stimulated at SFU to work interdisciplinarily? Was that something that inspired you?
Yeah, and even more so now, SFU is really going through a huge shift. It's going, well, we can talk about that some other time in academic land, but you guys should check out what SFU is up to with the new hires that they've just made. SFU has always been about interdisciplinary performance. It has not been about traditional theater making. It's always Grotowski based, which is a Polish theater maker, which had a totally different attack than the Stanislavski thing. But if you want to get into the roots, they kind of come from a similar spot. But we were working with dancers, we were working with musicians, we were working with filmmakers. I don't know if any of us could have named 3 Shakespeare plays when we came out of that school, because that was not what we were doing. Maybe the odd Pinter play. There's some Sam Shepard, we learned about that. But it wasn't about theater history. It was about digging into your own personal experiences and making new kinds of work with other kinds of artists.
Mm-hmm. Did you work together with visual artists?
Not as much. No, they were really separate back then. I don't even know where they're, we were in portables up on top of Burnaby Mountain. And I don't know where the visual arts portable was. We were not integrating with those guys, which was too bad, which is the big shift that's going to be happening over the next year or two.
Uh-huh.
At SF.
Yeah, because it's interesting, the interdisciplinary thing and the visual kinds of the proposals that you make in some of your work looks like, that you've been reading and seeing the same thing, as the performance art, how that part of the visual art world of performance art link into theater, dance, and that. I mean, it seems like what you do is very much there on that edge.
I think when you remove narrative convention, there's, you end up walking into this forest of other opportunities, and a lot of them echo visual arts and performance world because they're also wandering in that world. One of the great gifts of my maybe poor theater education, like traditional theater education, is you kind of come out as an amateur in a lot of ways. You don't know how to build traditional or construct a traditional narrative. So you start taking guesses and you start saying, well, the big dramaturgy that I usually apply is a dinner table or dinner party sort of dramaturgy, meaning when I go to a great party, I'll have a meal, I'll have some jokes, somebody will get drunk, maybe somebody falls down, there's going to be a fight in the crowd. I have not too many fights at the parties I go to, but it's just a series of random events, and the great ones kind of accumulate into something fantastic. But I wouldn't be able to say it's boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy finds girl again. They're random events, and that kind of amateurism was a real gift in our early theater making days because we just didn't know any better, except we knew when we were getting bored, and that's an important gauge.
Yeah, so the degree of excitement is the sense of delight is always part of what we need. Yeah. So how do you connect? Because I know you do. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you see the function of what you do in the art world in a political sense, or I'm not sure the word political is the right one. In an ethical and socially conscious, how your processes speak in themselves to the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, because we're pretty decidedly small p political, small s social, small whatever letter. We disguise our messaging. We're conscious of it. When a project I'm working on right now, for example, is deals with all these found Soviet films. And to do large P political, we would dig deep into the questions of socialism right now. And I think there's lots of great things to talk about in the value of socialism. We could talk about just about anything. But instead, we've devised this system of a large dinner that's going to be held at the Russian Hall in Vancouver. We're going to watch some of the films. We're going to probably create a fiction where these community planners are trying to repurpose the building. They're trying to figure out what to do with this building and looking at its history and trying to figure out how they're going to build its present and its future. That's how we usually attack these moments. Footnote number 12, attack the question. When we were making it, we started in 2016. Me Too happened 2017, I think, 2018. Immediately we responded to that. And we looked at the room, we said, oh my God, it's two white guys. We're just making this show by ourselves. We have to think about, like, what are we talking about? Like, what are we trying to say? How can we speak inside this room? We immediately found a female collaborator to come in as an equal with us so we could just add her voice to the room. Just so when we're asking these questions of ourselves, we had another input, Nancy Tam, who did all the sound modulation. She ended up controlling my voice in the end. It seemed essential that we add another voice in there as opposed to saying the blatant bad good. We said, well, let's just add more people into the room so they can bring their perspectives in. That's how we attend to these questions of equity and justice and diversity and inclusion, is we attempt to include as many people with diverse voices as possible in the creative process. And then we say we don't have to make anything that's large P political. We just have to make something together. And that in itself should be a political act if we find a way to not be a-holes to each other and find a smart way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for on a sort of connected to me, but the stories that you tell, because you talked about, yes, you don't have the sense of the linear narrative or the arc, the narrative arc. You don't follow that. The stories that you tell are engage in the immediate moment, right? That there isn't a sense of a conclusion or a resolution to the story, but it's rather about a kind of a lateral engagement of the audience. Do you see that as a political act?
To not conclude,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I think it's just a smart act. How do I know any different? I know how we end Winners and Losers is very consciously has no resolution at the end. And it's a game, like the game that we talked about, a play that ends up getting deeply into questions of class and race by the end, because Marcus is a brown guy, he's half Egyptian, but he comes from an enormous amount of money. I'm a white guy and I don't come from any money at all. So that conversation becomes really interesting, just again, by the two people we put at that table, the juxtaposition of expectation of who has money and who doesn't have money, that becomes a really rich conversation implicit by the people who are populating that table. And at the end, we do not conclude with a hug. We get really, really angry at each other. A lot of it is improvised. And then we just let it rot and we let the audience rot with it. And some people are not happy with that. But who are we to say, oh, but you know what? It's all going to be okay in the end. You know what? It might not be all okay in the end, where it's going to be a constant struggle to figure these questions out. Footnote number 12 really just discusses a footnote, the footnote number 12 inside this essay by David Foster Wallace, which makes no sense. Like, you read it 10 times. I've read it for 4 years. It doesn't make any sense grammatically. And I don't, how did he get it in there? Maybe because he was David Foster Wallace and nobody doubted or even dared to critique his semantic knowledge, but it just doesn't make any sense. And we leave the audience with that question of going, well, just read it again, see if you can figure it out, because I don't think it makes sense, but maybe it does, because maybe it does. And I'm just not smart enough to get it. So I'm not into conclusions, really. I'm hardly into second acts, quite honestly. I like shows that are just beginning after beginning after beginning, especially writing them. It's so much easier to write beginnings and endings. Maybe that's it. I'm just no good at writing endings. That's why I don't like them.
Yeah. Hey, I don't know. Resolution and ending are two different things, though. I mean, you can end something. Okay, folks, lights on, and everybody had time to go home. Thank you.
Yeah.
Resolution is something else. But there's, there's something in the way you set up a structure for a kind of a resonating structure, that you set something up where we identify oppositional forces, or we identify something, a situation, and then it resonates, and you let it resonate. So there's a kind of, I mean, there's like, some performance artwork where, if you came in the middle, you would get the same thing you might have got if you came in earlier, because it's about that resonance. It's like you set up this structure, maybe it's mythic, or maybe it's something, I don't know, big and clear, and it doesn't go away. It just arises and then dissipates, but doesn't resolve.
Yeah, and I think that's, I'm a theater guy still. Yeah, I still went to theater school. I still have values. I still like relationship on stage. I still like conflict on stage. I still like causality. There's a great book. That's the book I should have written down on my little list, which is A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. It's just my favorite, absolute favorite book. I actually shared it with the class that I was teaching at UBCO this year. I see Tony Yu's face there. I told him a couple little bits about it, or told that class. And it's by a guy named George Saunders, who wrote Lincoln in the Bardo, and he's written a bunch of great short stories as well. And it's his essentially lectures that he's been giving at the University of Syracuse, where he teaches a master's program in short story writing. I love narrative. I love a great movie. I'll watch a movie any day of the week, and I love scrapping it out with narrative. If you look at Winners and Losers, this game structure where we just debate things, you can see the first act, the second act, and the third act. You just don't see a denouement because we took it off. You can still track those things. I still use those tools because I think they work in a time-based art setting. When I have an audience sitting around me, they have certain expectations in the festivals or the venues I perform in, that they're going to feel like they're being taken care of. And one of the ways you can make an audience feel like they're being taken care of is that there's a certain amount of comfort in some conventions. You see people in relationship with each other, and I appreciate that. You see conflict arising. So I still use those tools, but I like to just kind of poke those bears a little bit to see how far I can push it.
Mm-hmm. So I think this will be my last question for you. And then we can maybe open it up to the audience, but, I'll continue to ask. Yeah, you say this in footnote number 12. Why do I do this? You ask yourself that question. Because you're in the midst of this, it seems at that point a ridiculous attempt to do something. We don't know what you're trying to do. You've got this white face and you've got these blue eyes and your voice sounds crazy. We can see that it's you, but we hear the voice we hear, we know it's treated. So there's a kind of a comic element, and it gets very complicated. And then you say to yourself, why do I do this? And so, yeah, I guess that is the question. Why do you do this?
Oh, not for the pension. I'm realizing more and more. Yes, as you creep towards 50, you start thinking about that pension piece. Why do I do it? I think I'll go positives first, because I still really enjoy it. I just like going into a room and trying to figure stuff out with people. Like, how do you make 90 minutes interesting? Like, how do you make it really interesting? How do you come up with a question that will hold? How do I come up with a question that's going to hold me for 3 years, or hold 5 people for 3 years going, and not every day of the week or every moment of the day, but when you come together for 3 weeks here, 2 weeks there, 1 week there, and you go, okay, I've been thinking about that question we asked, which, like, for Winners and Losers was a question: what if competition is inevitable? Is its logical conclusion genocide? It's like, if you can't beat competition, do you eventually just kill each other? And that's something Marcus and I thought about for a very, very long time. How do you stage a question like that? And Chris Abraham, who is the theater that we work, the director that we work with from Toronto. I love that problem. It's just riddles, and are they essential? Am I an essential service? I don't know if we were deemed essential service in the last 18 months or so. Is it a necessary service? I still have pretty good houses. Like, nice audiences come and see our work. We get celebrated for it. So I feel like we're necessary in some way. We mentor a whole ton of young artists that are coming up, telling them what we think we know, so they can mess it up and do it better. So I feel, are we relevant? I think we bring really important questions to a stage and allow people, and I do have some reservations about what's going on right now in terms of social innovation, a lot of the funding, that suddenly they're layering a lot of responsibility on artists to fix the world. I don't want that responsibility. I want to reflect social ills. I don't want to attend to them. And I think that's really important too, that we get to continue to dig in. That's why I do it. I want to hang out with people and make really good work. And then the other side is I'm too scared to do anything else. You know, what would I do? Like arborist, I was thinking today would be really nice. There's an arborist working across the street. I said, I could do that. I tree planted for 12 years. Maybe I could start cutting them down or just parts of them down. But yeah, I'm pretty happy where I'm at.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, you ought to be. Yeah. It's wonderful. I mean, I think all the pleasure that you create, that you generate, or you trigger when you perform must be a reason to continue, and that's why we come. And it's good.
I hope so.
Are there any any questions from the audience now? Okay, so I will look at the chat section here. If anybody has a question, actually, if anybody has a question, why don't you just unmute yourself and ask a question, or put up your hand. I think I can see everybody if I put it on gallery.
Yeah, I could ask a question, but we can't, our cameras are locked. So we can't we can't. Can you make it so that we can see each other?
I hope so. Colleen, do you know how to do that?
Be Greta. Greta.
Hello, Greta.
I'll work on that in the background.
Okay.
I'm just assigning everyone here. So sorry, is it Denise?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think if we're heading into a conversation, you could probably open people's cameras up. So.
Yes, thank you, Denise. Good point.
So James isn't chatting with my mugshot.
It's a very fancy mugshot.
It's a fancy mugshot, isn't it? Okay,
Yeah.
here's my question. I saw footnote 12. Like I saw one of your when you were working on it at the So I don't know when that was relative to the degree you then did in your graduate work in. What was the formal title of that degree? It was like.
Oh, I did a master's in urban studies.
Urban studies.
Yeah.
So my question is, what you learned in urban studies, has it influenced your process as a theater maker? And if it has, how? Like, I mean, so I don't know if the footnote 12, if that came out again after you had finished that degree?
It was concurrent. One was concurrent, and it was and it was driven by myself and this other guy who's a postdoctorate architecture philosophy guy. So he usually had more to say. So I just kind of tagged along with him for a lot of the kind of theoretical stuff underneath. I would say it's certainly much more impactful of the current project I'm working on, which is the Do You Mind If I Sit Here, the Soviet Films one, which is about the kind of elevator pitch is it's 2060. 4 young 30-something urban planners come into a building to repurpose a building, and they realize the old caretaker is still in there. It's an abandoned building for 35 years, dressed as a cosmonaut. And how are they going to get rid of this caretaker and repurpose the building? And it materializes as a big dinner, big dinner in the square, which thank God we can do. It looks like, according to Bonnie's new thing in January, it looks like we can actually sit together. And a number of sort of audience, not Bowalian, not the different kind of corporate get to know you games that we're going to play inside of this fiction. So that it is clearly my urban studies project, very much so.
Has the urban studies things influenced your process at all? Like that's almost thematically. That's.
You know, It hasn't dramatically. It was already like everything we already did was pretty iterative. You know, like we just go back in and try it again. Okay, try it this way. Twist it a little bit that way. Twist it a little bit that. And that's really what my urban studies process was. It was just interviews and focus groups and just twisting a question around. The two aligned really well. I applied a lot of theory to or theater to my urban studies degree. It gave me a lot of opportunities to just apply kind of creative thinking inside of writing, which I think is why they liked me so much in the program, because I just came in as like a 44-year-old going, this is what I'm thinking about right now. And they're like, oh, good. Something fresh and new. Yeah.
Any other questions? Anybody got questions popping out? Tony, Alana, Tracy? Give the man a question. Here's Colleen.
Colleen.
With your question. Colleen, go
I
for
was
it.
just wondering with your title responding to the moment, if what's transpired in the last year and all of our lockdowns, that we've had a lot of extra time to really reflect. And I'm wondering if the type of work that you might want to do going forward has changed, or is there a new project that has emerged because of our COVID situation that sort of might not have otherwise?
Yeah, we do an East Van Panto, this big thing we do every year now for the last 8 years or so, which is a real traditional English panto. We don't direct it as much. We don't direct it anymore. We used to be in them just because our kids were in them and we wanted to be on stage with our kids. It was fun. It's really quite different than the majority of work we do. So we made a panto film this year, which was really fun. That would not have happened otherwise without COVID. But this, again, this project that is supposed to go up on January 26th, do you mind if I sit here, is going to be hyper live. It's going to be about sitting beside each other. It's going to be about switching positions with people. It's going to be about breathing next to people. It's going to be about looking people in the eye. And that is my pivot inside the COVID moment. And it did not get funded by the BC Arts Council, because when they asked for the last funding round, they were still expecting everybody to make movies or film theater. And I'm done. I can't watch anymore. I can't watch any more film theater. I need to make something explicitly and expressly live. And that is really shaping the current process of going, how live can we get? How close can we get to each other? It's going to wig people out, I think. Maybe. It depends on how the fall goes. But I think it's going to be so welcomed by so many people, including myself, just to be in proximity. And because it's been a blink. It's only been 15 months. Like, it really is, in the larger scheme of things, it's going to be so quick that I think we're dying to get back in the room with each other again. So that has certainly had an impact in that direction.
Interesting.
Can I just follow on that one? So it sounds a little bit like the medium is the message somehow, the McLuhan thing. In your work, it's kind of a recurring thing where you set up a context for experience, where it's a lateral thing, where you engage people sort of unknowingly. The story has happened and they're already in it. You know what I mean?
They're going to be active, it is going to be, and it is, and I've used this word very carefully because I've been reading different things, but the relationality of things, like how people actually interact in the room with each other, is going to be critical to this piece. And then just to explain, I love it. I wish we could almost play it right now. The game that we play quite a bit, and the actors play it on stage and the audience plays it, they're just lineup games where you go, okay, line up shortest to tallest without speaking. So everybody just kind of reorganizes themselves shortest to tallest. Okay, good. And then, okay, now line up youngest to oldest. So that's a little more complicated, because then I run into Denise and we kind of stare at each other for a second. Okay, who's older here? Kind of do that little dance. And then you go richest to poorest. And then, so we have to assess each other and go, okay, you got more money than me? And then you can go further into brownest to whitest, or sweetest to sourest, or there's all these degrees of risk involved, and just liveness with other people in the same space of going, how is the status shifting right now amongst us? When does the status shift? What question do I get to be the most, and do I end up being the least? Where am I the most powerful? Where am I the least powerful? We play these games. We have a very intercultural cast. And when we played these games last time, it was so interesting. It was just after George Floyd. We were in June of that year. And we said, okay, who's the most powerful, the least powerful? And immediately Omari Newton, the black guy in the room, went, most powerful? Boom, straight to the top. And he said, who's going to mess with me right now? Honestly, who's going to mess with me? If this had been 3 years ago, he might have put himself in the middle or at the end. But he goes, at this moment, context is shifting constantly. Status is shifting. It'll depend on the news of the day how you position yourself inside this group. And we're going to try it with 50 people at one point of organizing themselves. And I don't know what that binary will be. And I hope people like it. Otherwise, it's going to be a real tough night. Because they're going to be trapped in this room. And there's a whole fiction that goes on with it. There's other things.
Other questions? Anybody? Anybody?
I have a question.
Yes.
Tracy Ross.
I'm in my van.
Oh, nice. Oh,
Hi,
Australia.
Dave. I know I'm tuning in. This is quite a specific question, and I haven't seen it. It's about winners and losers, and I saw it, well, like probably well over a year ago now. And you had the dinging of the bell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for those people that haven't seen the show, there's a table and the two are moving around a table, but on the table, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, James, is that like one of those, you know, if you're wanting someone to come to your service and you ding the bell. And I was wondering about the use of the bell and what the convention was. Like, what did it signify within the show? I'm just remembering, like, every once in a while, one of you would ding the bell. And I'm like, okay, what was the dinging of the bell? I'm trying to remember that piece.
It's shifted around. The bell could be used to acknowledge the win. Like if you won something, if I had a really good line, I went, oh, I just killed you on that one. Because we would say something random like balloons, and we have to argue winner or loser. If I was able to, if I had a great line, if I improvised a great line, I would see it in Marcus's eyes. He'd know he'd invested, and I'd ring the bell. I could also use the bell to acknowledge his great line. So if he really closed something down with a great thing, I would give him, because competition at that part of the show, because we stop using the bells at some point when we when I pull the table away and we wrestle. Competition, it's a friendly competition. We're just playing a game with each other. So when somebody makes a good shot, you got to give him his props, and that's what the bells were used for. And it was just sort of a sonic punctuation inside the piece, just to keep it more alive, as opposed to just two guys yapping at each other.
So when you were, because you said there was an element of that improv as you were going along, it was also then something that would keep you within the storytelling and moving because if you were improving and when you said, yeah, I can see that we both acknowledge that I've won that point, then you would ding the bell and it was a signal to move to the next piece or proposition.
And the other guy wouldn't, on occasion, you wouldn't let him have it. If Marcus rang his bell and it was not such a great line, I'd say, no way. And I would just ignore his bell and we'd keep going until something better was said. And then eventually it could peter out. That was the nature of the game when we were in pure improv mode. Sometimes they were great improvs, sometimes they were weaker improvs, but that was part of the charm of the show too, that sometimes we would just kind of have normal, boring conversations, as happens in everybody's lives. But we had a bunch of set stuff too and good lines.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Any other questions from the audience? We're all audience. We're all together. Whatever.
Okay, I have a question. Are you interested, James, in the interface with computational arts? Are you interested in any of that? VR or hologram,
We are doing it right now in a couple of public art projects. Something we have a sound piece that just went into a condo development that it's not super computational other than it's built on an algorithm where we have had 1,000 short pieces of text written and they play through these 3 holosonic speakers. So they're very specific speakers. So you stand underneath them and it almost sounds like you have a little iPod or headphones in. And it plays according to time of day, never repeats the same voice, never repeats the same style of voice. And that's all through a computer. So there's a bit of AI involved in that thing. A second public art piece that we're just about to start working on for a Broadway SkyTrain station for the new Broadway line uses LiDAR cameras. LiDAR cameras are the cameras that shoot out laser beams. They're so for self-driving cars, so all those little laser beams. And it films people in a very amorphous way. You can't tell any kind of identity or anything like that. It captures their images moving through a SkyTrain station, and then again through computer programming matches those images and those movement patterns to stored animations drawn and little GIFs, to put it simply, by this woman named Cindy Mochizuki. And what we're doing right now is we're applying for further funding. If we can get further funding, we're going to try to teach the computer to learn, meaning it'll start to learn patterns of movement and start to impose different kind of animations at different times based on its own impulses, as opposed to our programming. So a little bit, you know, I'm always into, but we work with this guy we call the dark wizard of computers, because my God, he knows everything. He can code, he can do everything that I don't fully understand. And we just ask Remy to do fun stuff, and we see what it can do. So a little bit of an interest, but right now I like humans. I just like humans in space. I'm so ready for humans in space.
You're just doing that site-specific stuff with VR where you've got the live actors, but VR, and you're not sure which is live and which is not, and you know, all those kind of weird hybrid things that are happening now. I was just wondering if you're interested in that at all, or
At the moment, I'm going to say no. Maybe in 2 years, once I get to hang out with people in the same spaces
Yeah.
again, I'm just dying for it. You know, I'm really dying for it.
me too.
Don't die for it. Just
No.
it's coming. Right. So what would you, anybody else questions? I have questions, but anybody else has a question that they might want to address, get James to talk about? All right. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Donna. Yes.
Yes, James, you mentioned except when you know that you are getting bored. Can you explain what that feeling is like for you? How do you identify that this is a good time to move in a different direction? Do you mind?
You know, sometimes it's just gut. You know, you just feel like the time has run out on this moment or this gesture or like a dramatic gesture, a scene, I guess, for lack of a better term. And you go, okay, well, that's, you know, I think I've run out of gas on this. I need some kind of rhythmic shift. It's just a dynamic shift. Like that's the most basic way. Inside of a narrative, as soon as I get ahead of it, as soon as I know what's going to happen and then I see it happen, I go, and I'm gone. I can feel that moment in my gut when I get ahead of a story.
Okay.
I'll also feel bored when I feel like either myself or the person who's made something for me hasn't asked a second or third question in it. And that's another gut question where I just go, this is too easy. This is too easy. You know, there's a more complicated take on this. I don't even have to know what the complicated take is necessarily. But again, it's a gut feeling of going, I bet you if you spent another day thinking about this or asked somebody to come in and challenge you, there might have been another answer that would have just turned it in another direction. So, you know, it's these are kind of goofy answers in a lot of ways. It's a lot of gut things, but it's about rigor. It's about getting ahead of a story, like in any story, reading a novel, watching a film. If you can tell what's going to happen in the next moment and then it happens, the bottom falls out. You know, it just falls out. And for me as a director, and that's the biggest task in any director's job, is to watch something for the first time every time. And that's really, really hard to do. But just to feel it in your stomach of going, oh, the clock just ticked. And it's not one of those interesting dips of boredom. It's one of those clicks where you go, no, this is just boring now. We've covered everything we could cover.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else here in the house? Okay, so James, what would you just mentioned rigor, that word came out. What would you say to a student who now wants to study to work in the theater world? What is the rigor that a performing arts like an artist, not a musician specifically, an interdisciplinary, somebody like you, a deviser. What is the rigor that that person needs to have? Is there a discipline? Is there a virtuosic thing, or is there what's the training?
Yeah. And I think it's why there's one here, Tony Yu, who's in there, and there's others that I got to teach at UBCO this year. Really, really exciting, smart, driven young artists. At this point, and I wouldn't say to Tony or Sage or any of those guys, go take a master's. I would say not yet. Go and make 5 things and invite your friends to them and find a way to talk about it. Like, ask them, did you get bored? When did you get bored? That's the easiest question. And they're going to say, oh man, I was so bored in that part where you were going da 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 da. And you go, and then ask them why. And then ask yourself why. Like, that's the only thing you can do. And that was the biggest gift, I think, that all of us coming out of SFU in that moment. There was, I formed a company called Boca de Lupo first with 5 other people. And we wrote a grant, somehow got $3,000 and made a show. And then we wrote a grant, got no money, and then we made a show. And we just worked, I folded t-shirts at Roots on Robson Street. It's a terrible t-shirt folder. But we just made work. And then I went and finished my degree in 2000. I left in 96 before I was completely done, because we just decided we wanted to make things. Like, you can read books, you can study. I would say go to art galleries. Always a good idea. Just go to art galleries, see work, but make stuff and fall on your face. Like, that's all you can do at a young age, because you don't know any better. But you know everything. You probably know everything you need to know to make a 45-minute piece. You don't need to know much more than what you already know. Just see what happens and ask your friends to come and ask your mentors to come and ask people stuff. I've already told Tony this a bunch of times. Just send emails to theater artists and important people like me that have a theater company, because we just want to hang out too. There's connections to be made out there. That's rigor.
Yeah, that's a kind of rigor. I guess it's like a kind of focus, a personal focus rigor, right? Defining for yourself how to pursue something. Yeah.
And you'll know, and people will fall off. It's not a big pool. There's not a lot of space out there for theater artists. And those that have drive and skill and talent will last if you push. And those who don't won't, and they'll go do something else that's amazing, hopefully. And that's cool too. It's really hard at that sort of 28-year-old or 29 or 30-year-old to go, maybe this isn't it. Maybe it's not it. And that's a really scary move. I do it now at 47. I'm always going, maybe this isn't it. There's got to be something else. But it'll come clear. There's a rigor in that too. There's a fear in that. And it's an abject fear in Vancouver right now, especially when nobody can afford to live in the city. But that's a whole other thing. That decision might come earlier for people, that they have to make that decision than they want to. But it's just make things.
That's a wonderful way to end this. I just wanted to share that also. At about your age, I was thinking, can I change? And I thought, I don't know how to do anything else. I could fold t-shirts or work in a bar, but really, I don't know how to do anything else. So I might as well keep trying on the same route. But make things. Yeah, that is, that's wonderful. A little mantra, make things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the end of the official interview. And no one has to go anywhere. And James has said he'll stay on. So if there are further questions or just people want to chat, or James said he would hang out for a bit, so we can just carry on. So just speak up.
I have a couple housekeeping notes just to finish up, but definitely want to thank James for sharing his experiences and stories with us today. Really appreciate your time, and Neil for graciously hosting as our guest host today. We have taped this talk. If you'd like to rewatch it or share it amongst your friends, please do. We'd like to grow our audience. We'll be posting it on our YouTube channel, which is the Rotary Center for the Arts YouTube channel. And we will be sharing out a resource list that James is providing for us. It's resources and recommendations, James?
Yeah, just things that I can't shake as inspirations and things that are new that excite me right now, for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely take a look at those. So we'll share those out via email. I know myself, I've written down a number of things that you've said just for some further reflection. So I really appreciate your time today. And I've also posted the link for the YouTube channel in the chat, if you're looking at the chat. And we'll mention that we'll be back in 4 weeks again for our last art talk before our summer break. And that is with
Joyce Rosario.
Joyce Rosario. So I just draw a blank there for a moment. And Neil will be back as our host. And then we'll be back again in September with John Summerland, our film commissioner here in the Okanagan, as our kickoff for September. So thank you very much for joining us. And I will leave you to continue asking questions or engaging with James more informally. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. I think Denise is leaving there. Greta's back. Tony's there. Tony has a question. I'm sure he does. Nope. Oh,
You're
there he
right.
is.
I do have
Tony.
a
What's up, Tony?
How are you?
Good.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask in terms of like in Vancouver and like or in a city, do you know of any places where, there's like a I don't know what the exact word is, a lot of artists or performers kind of get together. Of course, not now during COVID, but get together and kind of just like showcase like 5 minutes what they have, and kind of get feedback and then grow from there, that kind of thing. I don't know what I don't know. There's a word to describe it, but just can't find it right now.
There's things that used to exist. I don't know if they're going to come back after COVID, but there's a great one by Leaky Heaven Circus, which is a company based in the Russian Hall, where we have our studio as well. It's run by a guy named Stephen Hill, and they haven't done this for a couple of years, but they used to do a thing called Blink, which is 1 minute performances. And there's a bar, and you do these 1 minute performances, and then you have a drink, and then somebody else does a 1 minute performance, and they're really fun. And Steve's a pretty wild guy. No longer an instructor at SFU though. He has moved on. Is that not fired? Not quit? He's just moved into a new chapter of his life. It's pretty wild, Neil. You should talk to Steve about it. Yeah, he's made that decision to go, okay, I did that for 12 years. Now he's off to do something else.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. But I knew Neil would go, what? Impossible. But it's true. Great people there. Great new instructors at SFU. But they do Blink. 12 minutes max is something that the Fire Hall Theater used to do. There's another one, Brief Encounters. Look for Brief Encounters. Usually they're pairing more seasoned performers in interdisciplinary settings. But those are all little things that people do stuff really fast. And then, of course, as you know, there's fringe circuits, but that's not quite the same as these little fast and dirty salons. I guess you almost call it a salon.
Yeah. It's just on that topic of what you're talking about, you make something and you call your friends over and just perform to them. I tried that. And and all of my friends are in tech. They all code and they're like computer scientists and stuff. They're just like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? So I kind of find myself in a situation where I'm like, okay, I performed to these guys. They're not gonna get it, or like I'm not gonna get anything useful back, or even if I do, it's like kind of barely, to me at least, it's kind of like scraping the surface. And so I was just wondering if there's like places I can go to, just kind of I forget the word anyway. Yeah, so like places like Brief Encounters, like 1 minute performance sounds really interesting because like it's kind of like it reminds me of this of a modern of the modern entertainment system that we have now. Like, you know, I think we discussed this in class last semester as well. You know, TikTok is a very it's a place where you have to kind of capture the audience's attention in like a 30-minute or 30-second or 20-second video, and so it kind of raises the same flags for me at least.
It does, and TikTok's a totally valid form. You know, my daughter, a 12-year-old, my God, she can live on TikTok forever. It's actually an issue. We discuss her TikTok habits because I've scratched my head going, what could you possibly be interested in this stuff? But that's a great form. You know, I think TikTok's a totally valid form. Right now, as I've said a few times, I'm so interested in the live thing. Like, how do we make it a live encounter? How do you make a TikTok generation, which you're just on the cusp of being part of that TikTok generation? How do you make people sit in a dark room for 75 minutes? You know, that's a really interesting question. Is that even an option anymore? Should you be looking at 45-minute shows max? I don't know. Those are big questions.
I think to me at least personally, I've kind of played with or kind of brainstormed on the idea of, after watching one of your performances or the plays that your company has produced called bio boxes. Remember that? Yeah. In terms of bio boxes, I just thought, because it kind of is that kind of like, it has that scroll element you have on your phone, because there's a bunch of there's different performers in their little intimate space, and you could go around to different people, right? And they're all performing at the same time, kind of thing. You can press a button, it'll change their language, things like that. So I think something like that is on the path there of that, you know, of that TikTok-y kind of performance element. But
the short form.
Yeah, the short form.
Yeah, I don't know. I just, you know, when we did it way back when in the mid 90s, late 90s, we just rented a warehouse on the downtown east side, like right across from Pigeon Park. It cost us $1,200 a month for 3,000 square feet. Like, I can talk like one of these people now, which is crazy, like way back when. But it really, honestly, was $1,200 for 3,000 square feet. And we built a stage floor, a rehearsal floor, a sprung floor, and we would rent to dancers, and we would make shows and we would show them. I don't know how you do that today in the Vancouver market.
Yeah.
But you could do it. You could do it in a place like the Okanagan, honestly. There are great companies in the UK, and like Force Entertainment, who will always be one of the biggest influences on my performance creating sort of thing. When they graduated from like Exeter, I think in 1983 or 84, they all moved to Sheffield, England, which is just middle England, kind of, hopefully there's no Sheffieldians here, but kind of a dump in the middle of England. And they said, let's go up there and collect the dole and make work. Let's just make work. And that's what they did. And slowly the Sheffield people came in small little groups. And then slowly they started touring all over Europe with their work, because they figured out their thing in the absence of other instruction or other artists. They figured out what kept them interested for 90 minutes or 12 hours on some occasions with some of their work. Like, what do any of us know? Like, just make things. Make things, Tony Yu.
I mean, that, yeah, I think that's the mantra that I'm living with now. Just do it, you know, whatever. Like,
I've been saying it for years.
Tony Yu.
Don't think about it. Just do it. You know, if you think
No. Do think about it.
Work hard.
Do think about it and do it. Yeah.
Just work.
Yeah. Personally, I've been going on this tangent of kind of not really devising, but kind of doing things on the fly and seeing what works. Kind of, at least I think you know, taking, like, throwing something on the wall and seeing what sticks kind of idea. But yeah, I guess it's just they all are toddlers, just crawling, not really standing and running for themselves yet.
You know, there's something to consider, that this is Denise Clark, who's One Yellow Rabbit in Calgary. She has this thing called 50 repetitions. So yeah, do something quick, but then do it 50 times. Do it 50 times and just see. So maybe it's only 30 seconds long, or it's an hour and a half long, or whatever it is. but do it 50 times and try to apply some kind of critical eye. Because by time 20, you're going to be able to see it from the outside and going, oh, this is what happens here. This is what happens this way. You learn something by 30. You hate it by 35. And ideally, you crest something by 40 and you make a discovery. And then by 50, you're ready to make that change so you can do it another 50 times and figure out what the next change is. It's hard to make things by yourself in a vacuum. That's why I think she kind of came up with this philosophy or this practice of 50 repetitions. And it's also why you should, an ensemble's handy at your age. Like getting a group of people together that you can trust that want to work.
I know that's so, I mean, that's so, that's like the mindset that I want to be in. Like, I want to be in a space with a lot of different performers, not just in like a stage performer kind of aspect. Like, I mean, a theater performer or a play performer, you know, a dancer, you know, or even a new media artist, that those kind of people as well. And it's just hard because it's COVID. I mean,
It's
no one
COVID.
wants to meet up.
It'll stop. It'll end. It'll end.
I know.
It'll end. Yeah. And then you just gotta make it happen, Tony. You really do. It don't look to anybody else to make it happen for you.
Oh, exactly.
You'll find people along the way. If you start making something happen, people will notice, and you'll find support. But you got to start. You just really got to start. Got to make stuff.
Yeah. Oh, whoops. That's why I'm looking forward to like when you know, there's places that will have like those 1 minute performances or like, you know, like 5 minute performances. I'm like gonna go there, just planning to, hoping to meet new people there and be like, hey, want to collab? Hey, I got no money, but we can make something happen, you know.
Do it. There's places, and there's funding for young artists like you. Work for a couple of years and then you find a like I said, I've mentioned a bunch of companies to you already. There's funding to help young artists get their legs underneath them. So search it out.
Well, I think I'm done. I'm not that. No, I'm not done. I could talk all night, but I'm on a screen, and so are you guys. And time to say goodbye to the screen.
I hear you. I've been on it since 7 a.m. this morning. Love these things, these machines. Nice meeting you all. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you. It's been
Thank you,
really
James.
interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
James.
you.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was great.
Right.
Good.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Good night.